Let's begin with some CPU basics. Many types of devices have central processing units, or CPUs. If it has a CPU, then it could be considered to be a computer. Some people refer to the CPU as the brain of the computer, though that is debatable. Now here we have a typical CPU that's installed to the motherboard of a PC. In fact, this is the exact CPU I'm using on the computer I'm working on right now. This is an Intel Core i7 5820K CPU. Now, perhaps the most important term related to CPUs is the clock rate, which is the frequency of the CPU, and it's measured in hertz. This particular CPU runs at a maximum of 3.3 gigahertz, but it doesn't have to run at that maximum. Here we have two instances of the program CPU-Z, which can monitor our CPU. I mentioned the CPU doesn't have to run at the maximum rate. For example, the Core i7 5820K that we just showed will hover around 1200 megahertz, or 1.2 gigahertz, as shown here on the left, highlighted in yellow. You might refer to this as CPU idling. Not much is going on. The operating system is running, but not much else is happening. However, with more programs open, it might hover around 2400 megahertz, or 2.4 gigahertz, as shown on the right here, highlighted in orange. And it might go higher if I was to, say, render a movie or play an intense video game. The maximum that it's supposed to go to, without overclocking or turbo mode or anything like that, is 3.3 gigahertz. So we have a good amount of overhead here, and we can run additional programs if we need to without overtaxing our CPU. So know it. The CPU clock rate is the frequency or speed of the CPU. Let's end this video with CPU sockets. On a PC, the socket is the electrical interface between the CPU and the motherboard. It supports the CPU physically and allows for upgrading and replacement if necessary. The socket accepts either pins or LANs as connectors on the CPU. If the CPU has pins, then it is called a pin grid array, or PGA package, and it must be inserted into a PGA socket. If the CPU has LANs, then it is called a land grid array, or LGA, and it must be placed into an LGA socket like the one shown here. On this particular motherboard, we have an LGA 2011 or 2011 socket. That's the socket used for the previously mentioned Intel Core i7 CPU. Most Intel CPUs use LGA sockets, whereas many AMD CPUs use PGA sockets. PGA and LGA are both surface mount sockets for CPUs. Smaller systems, such as mobile devices, use embedded or soldered CPU connections. Usually, if the CPU fails on those devices, the entire board would have to be replaced. And so those interfaces are not as important for the A+ exam. And we'll talk more about the different types of sockets as we go through the videos. So there's a little bit of CPU basics for you.